We mentioned yesterday that Nadav Avihu, that initially they were supposed to die as a result of what they had gazed at the Shekhinah at the time of Kabbalah Satorah. Of course, it was considered a disrespect to look directly at the Shekhinah. As it says over there, Vayochel Vayishtu. They ate and they drank, meaning they consumed the Shekhinah as if they were just absorbing it, as if they would be doing something which is mundane. Because if they would have revered the Shekhinah sufficiently, they would have looked away. And because they didn't, they deserved to die. Because Hashem didn't want to upend the Kabbalah Satorah, that level of tragedy should take place then. Therefore, he postponed it till the Hakomas HaMishkan, to the 8th day when they were installed as Kohanim. As a result of that, that's why it happened, what happened. It was delayed. And the Shibim Zakanim, they also deserved to die, but they died when we read about the Slav, that the Jews, they wanted to have meat. Those who partook of that meat, it says they died, whether it was immediate or over a 30-day period. So I pointed out then, there's a concept in life, the way Hashem sets it, that a person's meritorious, Hashem brings merit to the meritorious. Otherwise, one doesn't merit. To be in a place where you succeed in a special way, you have to have special schus. You have to have merit. That's Megal Schus Zakai. The Shivim Zikanim, they deserve to be punished because they gazed at the Shekhinah directly, and it was considered a disrespect. How were they taken? They deserve to die then also. So again, they weren't taken then because it would have disrupted the simcha, the joy of Kabbalah Satorah. It would have undermined it. And the same thing is true with Nadav Avihu. But ultimately, when were they taken? They were taken during the story of the Slav. Meaning other Jews died, they died. But their death didn't bring about a Kiddush Hashem. Nadav Avihu, they were taken at the time of the Akamas HaMishkan. And Moshe Rabbeinu said to Aaron that initially I knew that somebody special will be taken during the Hakamas HaMishkan, when the Mishkan will take on its permanent status. And I wasn't sure whether it be you or be myself. But now that it was them, I see they are greater than we are. Why? Because Hashem had said to Moshe Rabbeinu, B'krovi HaKodesh, that through those who are closer to me, I will be sanctified. Therefore, they're greater than we are. And the Torah tells us when Aaron heard these words from Moshe Rabbeinu, Vayidom Aaron. Aaron remained silent. Vayidom Aaron. And over there, the Sephara says, what was the silence? That was the consolation. When Moshe Rabbeinu had shared with Aaron that the reason why they were taken was because they were more special, and the ultimate Kiddush Hashem came about as a result of their death, although it was a result of a sin, but that they were made into that example, the value of the death had the greatest value. That was the first public Kiddush Hashem which came about through their death. When Aaron heard that, Vayidam Aaron was consoled. Because their death had this tremendous, tremendous value. That the Shekhinah entering into existence, what happened at that moment, that his sons were the ones who brought about that first unique level of Kiddush Hashem. That was the consolation. That was the Nechama. Every day, there's a mitzvah of Zechiris Miriam. To remember, it's a positive commandment, and the Ramban points it out, that verbally, we have to speak about what Hashem had done to Miriam Hanaviyah, who was the sister of Moshe, as the Ramban explains, although she risked her life for Moshe Rabbeinu when she waited by the Nile to see what would happen, and she spoke about him, not in any way to be critical, in a negative sense, and she shared it with Aaron. She didn't make it public knowledge. She became a leper. So the mitzvah is to remember what Hashem had done to Miriam for speaking what she shouldn't have spoken. That's the positive commandment of what? Of not to speak Lashon Hara. Now, when Miriam became a leper, what happened? Initially, we were traveling in the Midbar. We're talking about millions of people were traveling. We had the Masos, we had the various camps, and they traveled. And it was led with a pillar of cloud, fire, and we traveled. When Miriam became a Betzora, became a leper, everything stopped. Miriam had to go out of the camp, and the Jews didn't continue traveling. Everything was put on hold. Why was it put on hold? To wait for Miriam to recover from the leper state. Everything was put on hold. And why was it put on hold? Because everybody knew that Miriam was a leper. And the words of Chazal, the Shekhinah waited for Miriam to recover. The Ani Akavod waited for Miriam to recover. The Shishim Rebo, 600,000 men above the age of 20, waited for Miriam to recover. Why? Because just as at the Nile, it says she waited to see what would happen to her brother after he was put into the Nile. Klal Yisrael, Mida connected me to waited for her to recover, to be able to re-enter the camp, and only then did they continue traveling. Miriam was a tzaddikus. As much as you're a tzaddik, if you fail, do you want to be public knowledge? You know what the level of embarrassment it is? You know, she would have preferred maybe let them continue traveling, and she'll catch up. She'll catch up. Hashem says, no. Mida keneged mida, measure for measure. As you waited for Moshe Rabbeinu, we're going to wait for you to recover. You see, something. I'm happy to be mochel, to waive it. You just travel. I mean, there's no greater disgrace. It's becoming, Hashem is making public knowledge that every Jew then and throughout history know exactly what Miriam had done. It would have been us. What would we preferred? Keep going. Keep it, sweep it under the carpet. I'll do tshuva. But yet, it's public knowledge. Every Jew was aware that Miriam had spoken about Moshe Rabbeinu, at least that she was a leper because she had spoken out of turn. And therefore, we all waited. And Hashem says, that's the schar. That's reward, mida keneged mida. As you waited for Moshe Rabbeinu when his mother put him into the Nile to see what would happen, we're going to wait for you. Shechina ane Yaakov shishim riba. How do we understand it? That Aaron's children were taken, that's Bekrovi HaKodesh. It's true. They were punished because of what happened at Kabbalah Satorah. They gazed directly at the Shekhinah. The Shivim Zekanim, the 70 others, when they died, how did they die? During the 30-day period of the Slav, when the Jews wanted meat, whoever partook of that meat died. So as others died, they died. But what was the value in terms of to go down for posterity? The lesson or the value of their death was purely atonement on a personal level. Nadav Avihu, their dying was not only atonement, it was Bekrovi HaKodesh. That through those who are close to him, Hashem will be sanctified, which was that special level of Kiddush Hashem. The deaths were Kiddush Hashem. That's Zakai. Hashem brings merit to the meritorious. Miriam, because she deserved to be rewarded, because as she waited, we will wait. But as we said, it's a disgrace. Let's just keep it under the radar. You know what it means? That she should be the lesson for all Jews, no matter how special you are. And even though the intent wasn't really negative, because she risked her life for her brother. She loved her brother. And she only shared it with Aaron, no one else. Nevertheless, you're not permitted to say it unless it has that special value. And it didn't. And she was held accountable. So the takeaway is for all 600,000 people, men, women, children, forever. Zocha Hashem Miriam Mitzrayim. And it's a mitzvah to say throughout history till the end of time. It's incorporated in one of the 248 positive commandments. Zocha, remember. Miriam has that schus that she is the example for all of us to be careful, how careful we have to be with our speech. So this is the ultimate begav neschus al yizakay. It's a Kiddush Hashem, Dash B'soch B'nei Yisrael, to give you a life, to sanctify Hashem's name. Rabbi Akiva was the greatest of the Asar Rugi Malchus, of the 10 martyrs who were killed by the Romans. An ordinary person gives his life to sanctify Hashem's name. It's a great thing. Every Jew is obligated to give your life, to show your love for Hashem, to sanctify His name, even to give away what's most precious to you. If you take an ordinary Jew or an ordinary Talmud Chacham, take Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was the leading Torah sage of that generation. When he was being killed, his Talmidim were crying, and his Talmidim weren't ordinary people, because they realized if Rabbi Akiva passes away, that special level of Torah will no longer exist. The Gemara in Sanhedrin says, what was his level of understanding of Torah? Oka Harim Tochen Zubuzu. He would uproot mounds and grind them together. That was Rabbi Akiva. And now there's a question. There's a decree that you're not permitted to teach Torah publicly. It was called Shas Hashmad. They wanted to uproot Judaism. Rabbi Akiva taught Torah. And he was put to death for that. So Rabbi Akiva, what was Rabbi Akiva? His Torah, the way we would quantify it, there's nothing comparable to it, even in his generation, among the greatest. And he says, to sanctify Hashem's name, that has greater value than all the Torah that I could disseminate and I'm able to what? To bring about. That's the ultimate Kiddush Hashem. So that his Kiddush Hashem and ordinary Jews' Kiddush Hashem is a different level of Kiddush Hashem. What is Reb Kiva giving up for the sake of Kiddush Hashem? What's the ordinary Jew giving up for Kiddush Hashem? The person's a shoemaker, observing shoemaker. What's he giving up? He won't be able to do the mitzvahs. He's not going to repair shoes. Or he's not going to do this. But Reb Kiva, so Reb Kiva, by him giving his life and making that decision, his level of Kiddush Hashem is another level. That did not have view. And Reb Kiva saw it as a schus, as a merit. And Reb Kiva said to his Talmidim, the Gemara in Brachos, they're crying. He says, you don't realize, I've waited for this moment all my life. Hashem presented me with the opportunity to be able to display my Avos Hashem Chol Nafshecha. There's no reason to cry. So he saw this, that Hashem brought about this opportunity for him to bring about the ultimate. None of the view, although they were taken, it was tragic. But in terms of the value being taken, was the B'Korvei HaKodesh. That's Acharei Mos Shnei Bnei Aaron. Because they had done the wrong thing at Sinai, they had failed. Hashem says, you're going to be punished. But simultaneously, your punishment will exhibit and display B'Korvei HaKodesh. And you're the objects to display that and to make that publicly known, that even though that may be your only sin, but factually speaking, Hashem is so exacting when it comes to justice. There's no favoritism. You can be the greatest tzaddik. Justice rules, you must die, you die no matter who you are. Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron would walk. They were the leaders. Who would walk right behind them? Not the Avihu, Elazar Somer. Not the Avihu with his children Aaron. They were the greatest of the four. And they would walk right behind Moshe and Aaron. And then Elazar Somer, and then there's Canaan, the elders. And the Medrash has a question that each of them, when they were walking, they would think to themselves, Mosa Yamusu Zakein, one of these elders is going to pass away and we'll take over the mantle of leadership. That's what went through their minds. The other opinion says no. They discussed it among themselves. When is Moshe and Aaron going to pass away? So we'll be able to take over the mantle of leadership. I mean, what's going on over here? I mean, it seems to be totally inappropriate. How do you? So Hashem says, we'll see who's going to pass away first. And then the incident of on the eighth day, what happens? And they're taken. What exactly were they saying? They believed, every generation has its leaders. And why does it have different leaders? The Gemara tells us in Titus, Chonei Amagil. Chonei Amagil was a person, the Gemara tells us, that if there was ever a drought, he was such a tzaddik that it hadn't rained for years, for a very extended period of time in Eretz Yisrael. And the Zkanim came to Chonei Amagil that he should pray that there should be rain. Spal, there should be rain. He was called Chonei Amagil because he would dig a depression in the ground, a circle of the depression, stand there, and he'd lift his eyes to Hashem, and he'd say, Hashem, your children need rain. And the moment he said that, all of a sudden, the clouds started to gather, and it started to drizzle. He says to Hashem, it's not going to work. It's not going to make a difference. Your children need rain. It hasn't rained. It comes down in torrents. Immediately. He says to Hashem, we didn't ask to be flooded out. No, we want Gishmei Brocha, rains of blessing. Then it rained as it should rain. And those were the rain. So Shimon ben Shetach, who was the head of the Sanhedrin, sends a letter to a message to Shmuley Amagil. In truth, you deserve to be excommunicated. I mean, how do you speak to Hashem in such a way? It's a total disrespect. Drizzle, you say, it's not going to make it happen. And it comes down to Torah to say, you're going to flood us out. Is that the way you speak to Hashem? You deserve to be excommunicated. But because you're Keben Eitzel Aviv, you're like a child to a father. A child speaks to a father differently than another person speaks. You have a king. The prince speaks to his father differently than an ordinary person speaks. Ordinary person speaks with reverence because you're the subject of the king. But since you're Keben Eitzel Aviv, you have a right to speak differently. That's the only reason why I'm not excommunicating you. That's the story of Chonei Amagil. Chonei Amagil had a question. We say in the Shir Malus that it'll be that the Golus for the 7 years we would be in Bavel would be like a dream, be like a chalom. So he says, how's it possible to dream for 70 years? Zemara tells over a story. The Chonei Amagil, he's walking in the field and he wants to take a lunch break. And he stops and he sees a person planting a carob tree. It's called charubim. A carob tree takes 70 years to grow, to produce fruit. 70 years. And he says to this person, if it takes 70 years to grow the tree, what are you spending time? You're not going to see its fruits in your lifetime. That's the question Chonei Amagil asked to this person. So the person says to them, I may not see the fruits, but my grandchildren will benefit from the fruits. So I'm planting now for the future for my grandchildren. That's what he says to Chonei Amagil. Okay? Chonei Amagil sits down by a wall, by a large stone, like a boulder, and he eats his bread, falls asleep. He sleeps for 70 years. Miracle. He sleeps for 70 years. Because he asked the question, how's it possible to sleep, to dream for 70 years? He wakes up after 70 years. And when he wakes up, he sees a fully grown carob tree. The tree grew. And there's a person who's tending the tree. And he says to him, who are you? This tree, where did it come from? He says, my grandfather planted it. That's what the person says to Chonei Amagil. My grandfather planted the tree. And initially they were just a few sheep. And now he sees flocks and flocks of sheep. He says, he says, comes from, these are the offspring of multiple flocks that originally my grandfather started to raise sheep. Okay? So he realizes he hasn't been around for a while. Chonei Amagil, he goes into the base medrash and he hears them saying, Chonei Amagil was a Tana. and he hears them saying, Choni says this, he's been quoted in the Beis Medrash. Choni says that, Choni says this. So he says to them, by the way, I want to explain you something. I'm Choni. He says, you're Choni? Choni hasn't been here for 70 years. What are you talking about, you're Choni? Choni Magel didn't forget his learning. See, no question, he interacts, just look, and he could quote whatever they were quoting. So you know what he said? But they didn't accept him as being that special person. So he says to Hashem, O chavruso o misuso. Either I should have a partner or take my life. I cannot live as an individual. I need some type of a peer group, to exist within a peer group. And if they're not accepting me, take me from this world. And he passed away immediately. That's the story of Choni HaMagil. Oh, Chavrusa o Misusa. What do you see over there? But one day accept him. He's a Torah sage. He surpasses any Torah sage of that time. They're quoting him in the Beis Medrash. The answer is because every leader in it has to be somehow tailor fit to the generation. Whether it's the personalities, whether it's the vibe, whatever it is. Just having Torah knowledge is not enough. Leadership is much more than that. Being able to be that representation of whatever he's supposed to represent. Nadav and Abihu believed when they walked behind Moshe and Aaron, they were older. They believed that it's time for new leadership. There's a new generation that left Egypt. There's a future. It's time for us. When are they going to pass away? Should we be able to? Because they saw things, maybe they would have done things differently. So Hashem says, we're going to see who's going to pass away first. But again, what that attitude, they meant L'Shem Shamayim. But even to think it, it's for the same reason why at Sinai, they gazed at the Shekhinah, that they felt they didn't have that level of sensitivity, that it's inappropriate. And when they ruled without consulting with Moshe Rabbeinu, the same thing. It was the same core problem. If you would have had sufficient humility at their level, Chas Shalom, can't even relate to what it is. If they would have had humility at that special level, they would have never considered giving a rule without consulting first with Moshe Rabbeinu. They felt they were qualified. They felt they had a right. And therefore, in their minds, they thought, when are we going to take over the leadership? Because it's a new generation. And therefore, what we have to offer, Moshe and Aaron, regardless of the Torah dimension, we have what to offer, which they can't offer. Hashem says, you people are mistaken. And therefore, this attitude or this perspective is going to trip you up. It's going to end your lives. And it did. That's what happened on the 8th day of the Kabbalah Mishkan.
So, Rabbi, my question is,
what is it now? You had a person who wasn't well, and doctor tells him, don't eat cold food, don't sleep in a damp location. Okay? And then another person has the same medical condition, and he says, don't eat cold food, don't sleep in a damp location, because if you don't want to die as the other person died, you better heed my good advice, medical advice. So whose message is a stronger message? The first patient or the second patient? Now that you have an example that because the person did not heed, follow instruction, he died, so the second person can take it more seriously. So therefore, the Torah says, Acharei Mos b'nei Aaron. Since Hashem is saying that Aaron has no right to go in that area, only on Yom Kippur, which we speak about Avodas Yom Kippurim, only those special times, even though you're Aaron, don't think you're not going to be less culpable. You have that same level of culpability. And by giving him the example that his sons, he'll take this warning, this directive much more seriously. That's Rashi, cites from Elazar ben Azariah. We're talking about Aaron HaKohen. Aaron is what is, in a certain context, equivalent to Moshe Rabbeinu. He needs an example. If Hashem says no, is no. Right? So, I mean, you talk about someone else maybe, but Aaron, we'll leave the question. Let's do it, Allah.